Detours is the topic for today. Detours, detours, detours. So there are two scriptures that will be guiding the conversation, and they are Jeremiah 29:11 and Proverbs 19:21. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. So a few weeks ago, I was driving my kids to school and we were cutting it close. And I always turn on the GPS, not because I need to know how to get there, but because I am always concerned with time and flow of traffic and whether or not we'll be able to make it on time. So on this day, I did turn on the GPS and it said, they'll get there and it was like right on time. And I'm like, great, this is fantastic. So we turn on the GPS and I also look to see which there are different routes I can take. I also look to see which route is the quickest. So, I found that route and it was we were scheduled to get there right on time and I was like, this is good. Okay. So we're driving, and then I see the alert that says um not traffic, but due to, an accident, there's a detour. And it's like a 5 minute delay, a 5 or 6 minute delay. And I'm like, oh my goodness, because again, the GPS had us arriving right on time. So I'm like, oh my goodness, Lord, we're going to be late. And I was upset. I was upset because I had gotten my hopes up because we were going to get there on time. The GPS said we were going to get there on time. And then now the GPS says there's a 5 minute delay. So I'm just kind of disappointed. I'm upset, not even disappointed. I am upset because we're going to be late. So I keep driving and it comes up again. And then it also says, but you are still on the fastest route available. And I'm like, okay. And then it says your arrival time is 8 o'clock, which is the time school starts. Um, so I'm like, okay, there's a delay. It's a 5 or 6 minute delay, but I'm still on the fastest route possible. And it's still telling me I'm going to get there on time. This doesn't sound right to me, but I'm going to just go ahead. So I go, we're driving, there's an accident. There's a delay, back to back, just bumper to bumper traffic. I'm like stopped on the highway and I'm like, there is no way possible we're going to get there on time. But I'm just going to keep going. I have no other choice. So I work my way through the traffic and we get there at 8 o'clock. We get there on time despite the traffic, which is heavier than normal due to an accident. Despite this delay, we got there at 8 o'clock where at the time the GPS said we were going to get there. I said, all right, Lord, there is a message in this experience. And I think about the detours that we have in life. The detours that always seem to come when we feel like we're actually on track, right? Detours don't come when we're already on one detour, right? They don't come when, things are crazy. They come when we have an expectation that we're going to get to a certain place we're going to get to a destination and we're excited about that because for whatever reason, we believe that our arrival is timely, it's purposed, it's where we need to be when we need to be there. And I thought about how in life, God puts us on these detours. You know, there are some times where God will intentionally place us on a path that seems contrary to where we think we should go. And that could be based on our own desires. It can also be based on our interpretation of His will for our life. And I thought about examples in the Bible where God took people on detours. And I wondered what could be learned from those experiences. So the most powerful example and well-known example to most people is the example of the children of Israel and the detour that they were on as they were walking, working their way to the promised land, the promise that God had for them. Now, when the Israelites left Egypt, when Pharaoh let them go, and this is in Exodus 13, the stories in Exodus 13, 17 and 18 is where I'll start. When Pharaoh let the people go, and the Bible says this, God did not lead them on a road through Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. And the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. So here we have an example of them crossing the sea, walking towards the Red Sea to cross the Red Sea. And God saying, there is an easier way. There's a shorter way. There's a way that's going to get them to this place sooner, but I am not going to take them that way. I'm going to take them on a detour. And I'm going to do this because they're not ready for war. And if they go this shorter way, they're going to come up against the Philistines or the Philistines, and they're not going to be able to withstand that. So what they're going to do is turn back and go back to the place that I just delivered them from. They're going to go back to that hell because they're not prepared for that future that I have for them. So I need to give them some more time. I need to develop them a bit more. I need to prepare them for this promise. So he took them on a detour. While they were on that detour, God protected them. They did come up against, we all know the story. There were several armies that they had to fight. There were several challenges that they had to endure. But God protected them and God provided for them while they were on that detour. So what we already can pull from this is that one, God will take us on detours. And the detour can come after, often comes after a place of deliverance, right? And with that place of deliverance, normally when you're delivered from something and you're excited about your future, there's an expectation that there's not going to be a detour. There's an expectation that you'll be able to just walk into that promise that God has already set you on a path for. But as we know now, looking at this example, God may put you on a detour even after that deliverance. But we also know that he will protect you and he'll provide you while you're on that detour. So after they traveled, um, the longer way, and I'm not talking about the 40 years, the full 40 years in the wilderness, because sometimes we create problems for ourselves and we make decisions that are outside of the will of God that turns our detours into the destination. And that's exactly what many of the children of Israel had to experience. Some of them died in the wilderness, right? That 40 years in the wilderness was not part of the detour that God planned. That became a destination for those who died in that 40 years because of their disobedience, their ungratefulness, their posture, their behavior while they were on that detour, which was longer than going through the Philistine country, but it was much shorter than the 40 years that they ended up staying in the wilderness due to their own choices. So I wanted to remind us here not to turn our detours into the destination, because detours are exactly what they are. They are short, and that short could be a day, that short could be 5 years, right? But it's not supposed to be it is not meant to be the final destination. And unfortunately for some of the Israelites that were not able to go into the promised land, the detour became the destination for them. And when talking about thinking through how do we position ourselves while we are on detours, this text, this example of the Israelites on a detour gives us some good information. Moses, when he was talking to the children of Israel, he told them, "Don't be afraid." He said, "Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Okay, so again, that's another example of the temporary state that God intended for the Israelites to be in on this detour. It wasn't supposed to be for a long time. He said, "The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And I wanted to focus on the last part of that. You need only to be still. While we're on our detour, we don't need to do too much. And most times we do too much, and that ends up prolonging our stay um, in the detour. Moses said, "You just need to be still and let God handle it. Let God provide for you. Let Him protect you. Let Him do what He does best." He knew this detour, you'd be on this detour. He allowed you to take this detour. He knows what you need to get through it, to get to the destination. Oftentimes, we start taking things into our own hands. We start getting impatient. We start getting antsy. We start getting frustrated. And we do things. We start moving, right? We start moving and we end up making poor decisions that prolong our detour. Now, the third point is that God allows trials along the detour. Okay, so it's not, the challenge is you have to be still although you're going through trials, right? Now, being still when everything is peaceful is an easy thing to do, but God allows trials along the detours. You know, the Israelites still had to, they still came up against enemies, right? They still had to deal with moments where they didn't know where their provision was going to come from, right? You remember God fed them with manna. He fed them daily so that they had to learn how to trust him. They didn't know where their food, their water was going to come from. They couldn't plan ahead. They had to really trust in him. You want me to be still. You said to be still, but we're coming up on enemy territory. We're coming up against these fierce warriors. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to be still. How are we going to be still and survive this? They had to learn how to trust him. Those trials strengthened their faith. And the trials that we experience along our detours also strengthen our faith. We have to learn to trust him. We have to learn to surrender our needs, our wants to him, and believe that he is going to provide for them and believe that he is going to protect us no matter what we come up against as we are on this path. The story goes on to say in the text that the Lord saved Israel from the hands of Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So they were able to escape, right? They were able to escape the Egyptians. They finally got onto the path where they were no longer being pursued by their captors. And that experience, God allowed that experience, God used that experience to strengthen their faith in him. So they saw how they were delivered. They saw how further along in the journey, how they were being provided for, how they did not, they didn't starve. Everything that they needed were given to them. They saw how their enemies were defeated, and they put their trust in him. That allowed them to fear the Lord and put more trust in him. So our detours will have trials, but those trials are to strengthen our faith. And then lastly, the Lord will lead you to your destination. That detour will lead to your destination, and it will be right on time. It will be right on time. Exodus 15, in your failing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed, and your strength you will guide them to your holy dwelling. God led the children of Israel, the Israelites, to the promised land. They did get there as he promised. They got there and they inherited the land just as God had promised them to do. And they got there in God's time. Now, thank God for his grace, because again, they made some poor decisions. They made some decisions that extended their stay. But because God is gracious, by the time they got there, it wasn't like the land had lost any of its value. It wasn't like those things that he promised, the milk and honey, the vegetation, the richness of the land, the vastness of the land changed. They still were able to inherit all of those things. So that all happened. They reached their destination essentially on time. And I wanted to just share their story to remind us that God has a plan for us. And that plan may not, and oftentimes it does not, align with our plans for ourselves, right? But his plan is always to prosper us and not harm us, to give us hope in the future. It is always for the good of our lives, the good that we may not be able to see, but God knows. So he will, just to go back, he will take us. God will take us on a detour. You should expect a detour in life. If you have not already um experienced it and are used to to detours, God will take us on a detour. He'll take us on many detours in our lives. And it's an intentional decision from him because it's something that we need to learn, something we need to experience before we can get to that promise. It's something that we can't avoid, but we could prolong if we are not intentional about being in his will, although it may be uncomfortable. If we're not leaning on him to help us along the detour, help us along the journey, help us through the trials that we will encounter along the way. And we have to trust that he will lead us to where we need to be on time. How we behave matters. While he's protecting us and he's providing for us on our detour, when he's doing what it is that he has always said he will do and has always done for our lives, how we position ourselves, how we act while we're on that detour does matter. It can either prolong the detour by a little bit, or it can turn that detour into a destination, which is something that we do not want. So, with that, I wanted to again remind us that God knows the plans He has for us. They're plans to prosper us and not harm us, and plans to give us a hope in the future. And many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails.